Welcome everybody to my podcast, Dear Children, episode two. As I mentioned in my episode one, this podcast is really based on the autobiography of my father, Dr. Muhammad Nazir Bhatti, that was recently released in May of 2025. And in my first episode, I was able to share a little bit of the context about this autobiography and why is it important to me and what I hope to gain from it as I do this podcast in your presence, and hopefully we can learn some good lessons together. In today's episode, actually, I'm going to focus on my dad's parents because I can tell over the years that his parents had a huge impact on who he has been and how he has interacted with us and what lessons he has left for us. Specifically, his relationship with his father, as he shares in chapter 2, his father, whose name was Fazl Ilahi, he remembers my grandfather, his dad, as a very impressive, solidly built, tall man with a lush beard, who was very formal in his dressing, wearing a traditional shalwar kameez, and on his head he had this very formal turban with a very formal form to it. So he was a formal guy, but a very kind, loving man. As my father keeps on repeating that in this chapter where he talks about his dad, and also some good lessons on parenting that his father really showed a lot of patience in the face of all the mischief which his children or other children put in front of him. He never lost his temper, which is just a lesson for me. Sometimes I have a little less patience with children. And he specifically talks about this episode where he actually did stretch the limits by doing something mischievous in front of his dad, his dad basically called my father and said, "Hey, come close to me." And my father basically responded, "Baji," and he used to call his dad Baji. Baji, I'm not as stupid as to let myself to be caught and beaten. And at that, Baji or his dad actually just chuckled and forgave him and just told him not to repeat that. So what a great and a tender way of really parenting. You get that lesson from this. And specifically says that my father does talk on a couple of occasions and really very fondly in this chapter how kindly and how lovingly his father actually dealt with my mother or with his daughter-in-law, and something really very cute to see and just very nice to see where my dad talks about that when my wife was pregnant with my older brother and my sister, his father really took very good care of his daughter-in-law and bringing him fruits and specifically some very nice berries, and just tremendous lesson on this relationship. And then my dad specifically talks about I really learned to love and forgive others from the conduct of my father, and actually I could vouch for it as I see that a very strong trait for my dad, really over his life so far. And then in regards to his mother, his mother's name was Habib Begum, and I really read this section of the book with a lot of interest because even though I was not able to meet my grandfather, I got to spend a lot of time with my grandmother. We come from very humble and modest beginnings in Lahore, from a small house where we used to live with two bedrooms. And while my parents had one master bedroom, the other bedroom belonged to my brother and I, and as we shared that with our grandmother. So I was quite interested to see that how my father kind of spoke about his mother, and he calls her a kind woman who was a devout Muslim, and who really missed her namaz. And I can relate to it because as I was growing up, it didn't matter what season, what part of the year, my grandmother was saying namaz at least 5 to 7 times a day, and regardless of how cold it may be, and because we didn't have any hot water facility in our house, she would be waking up at 4 in the morning and doing ablution with really cold water and paying her respects and saying namaz and so forth. So that was good validation there. And then my father talks about a little bit about the relationship my grandfather had with his wife, and specifically talking about that my grandfather was not a religious man, but because of my grandmother, he actually got influenced and became quite devout religious man himself, and really learned namaz and to recite Quran. So just talking about the impact spouses can have on each other in a very meaningful way. Finally, we're just going to talk a little bit about his city called Faridkot, which was part of the Faridkot state. So my father actually was raised and born in that city. Faridkot state, as my father shares, actually was had a different name. It was called Makalhar. But as the story goes, that Raja Manj, who was the chief of the city, actually was pointed to a laborer in the field who actually was helping with construction. But as he was helping with construction and he was carrying a heavy load on his head, the big pile of load actually was not on the head of that laborer, and there was actually a space in between the pile and his head, which was of course a miracle, which made the Raja Manj or the chief realize that the guy they were using as a laborer was actually a very important saint by the name of Baba Fariduddin Ganj Shakar. And based he got very ashamed, the Raja, that he was actually making the saint work as a laborer. So he actually begged for forgiveness, and just in the honor of that laborer who was a saint, he actually named the city of Makalhar as Faridkot. It was one of the largest cities of Faridkot state, but again, that didn't mean much in terms of facilities and the socioeconomic conditions of the city, because as my father shared in this chapter, it was a very impoverished city with barely any paved roads. The most common means of transportation was for people to just walk. Barely there were tongas or any carts with ox, but not many people could afford those. And also, even this big town, the houses were mostly small. Very few houses were constructed with bricks, and many houses were actually built with a mixture of clay and straw. And interestingly, latrines were very rare in even that big city, and most of the urban areas had latrines on the roof, which was basically nothing but just arrangement of some bricks. And there were folks who were considered low caste who actually would come and clean those latrines for a small pay. And because this was such a distasteful task, according to my dad, these folks would have to be consuming cannabis for them to be able to perform this task. And the cannabis in that area used to be called bhang. So these folks who would come and clean these latrines were called bhangis. So quite interesting, really, how the culture of sewerage worked. And all of that was actually a luxury for bigger cities. In rural towns, there was actually no latrines available anywhere close to the house, and people really had to walk for a long way, going out in a field to really relieve themselves, which was really hard for young ladies and women and patients and pregnant women and so forth. So my dad talks about that. And electricity was just not available at all at that time in India. So it was just quite eye-opening for me, that realizing that from where my father comes from in the early 1940s to now in 2025, the amount of growth and development he has gotten to see is just phenomenal. I don't think there are going to be many generations coming after their generation or my generation who have been able to see such a change in the socioeconomic condition and such innovation and evolution in technology, where they came from no electricity up to a point where now we're using AI and robotics. So what a phenomenal story from my father to be able to experience and then talk about it. And that just makes me excited about going through this book, because we are going to see that manifest and unfold in many different ways, and how it impacted people, and how it impacted the governments, and how it impacted many other systems as we go through this book. So I'm really excited and curious about that now. And lastly, my father kind of ends this very important chapter about Faridkot, that even though it was a very highly Muslim population in the city, when the partition came, the folks over there were very surprised and shocked to hear that Faridkot ended up being on the side of India, even though it was more populated with Muslims. it took everybody by surprise, and that kind of led to a sequence of tales and stories around migration for my father and his family, which we'll be talking about in the next episodes to come. Quite fascinating stories to come in that regard. Some heart wrenching descriptions. I will warn you. So I hope you are enjoying. I did enjoy these few chapters, which were quite intimate for my father. I learned a lot about my father, about his humble beginnings, and I think through that about myself. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll be back with the next episode of Dear Children podcast in a week or so. Take care.